Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, How to Beat the Giants, Winning Tendering Tips for SMEs. And thanks very much to everyone for joining me on this, certainly where we are, sunny Tuesday morning. Thanks for your time and for coming along, and hope to be able to provide some good value to you across the session, which we've got scheduled in for 45 minutes this morning. Okay, so we're just after 10 o'clock now. There are still people joining. There's quite a big group on the line, but we will get going. We'll bring up some objectives and kind of talk through what we plan to do, how we plan to spend the time. I will say at this point, there are a lot of people that have joined the webinar this morning. Thank you very much for doing so. We will have time towards the end of the session for a Q&A, but I would encourage everyone to don't feel like you need to wait until the end of the session before asking any questions. If you do have any questions, I'll try and keep an eye on it as we're going through the presentation, and I'll try and find some appropriate spots to pick up on some of the questions that have been asked as we're going through. And we'll also, like I say, try and have some dedicated time to look at this towards the end of the session as well. In terms of myself, just to give you a very brief introduction, my name is Andrew Watson. I'm the Bid Training and Consultancy Manager here at Proactus Tenders Direct. I oversee the team who support with all things relating to winning bids. So we help our clients to be as successful as possible in terms of actually when they are getting into the responses, so to help them secure as much business through public sector tendering as they possibly can, and be as successful as possible in that endeavour. So all the things that go into that support in terms of helping them improve their own capabilities and providing them with additional support as and when they require it too. So I've been doing that for a good number of years, and I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different bids. So I've got a reasonably good idea in terms of understanding what's likely to be successful, what's likely to not be successful, and how we can move, tick over more in towards the areas where we're going to pick up that much more success. But anyway, didn't come to listen about me waffling on. We'll go into the webinar proper now. So in the webinar, we're going to cover, the type of things around this whole, how do we as SMEs be as successful as possible? So we've broken down some different topic areas that we think are going to cover. Obviously, Rome's never built in a day. There's a lot to go over. There's a lot that makes businesses be successful at tendering, but these are some of the building blocks. And really, the idea behind this webinar today is to give you some food for thought. You're going to pick up some tips and some lessons. You go, okay, well, maybe that's something we can apply, but it should also trigger some follow-on actions for you guys internally for your business, and go, okay, well, this is something that we maybe need to spend a bit of time and effort to develop. This is an area where we're perhaps not strong, or there's room for us to improve there, with the idea that over time we can get better at this and we can pick up more than our fair share of contracts in this space. So that's the idea behind. One of the things I'll probably keep referring back to across the course of the session is, there isn't any one silver bullet here. There are lots of bits, there are lots of contingency, lots of component pieces that are going to make up being successful within this space. And it's really important, I would say as well, to continue to think, or to start thinking, if you're not already, at a kind of strategic type approach. So to try and take that sort of helicopter overview, look about your business and the landscape within which you operate. So we need to get into the detail, into the minutiae, but we also need to think about, okay, well, given the business we are, what we're looking to do, what we're looking to achieve, how do I maintain that sort of helicopter view over what I'm doing to give ourselves the best chance of success? When I'm doing something, an individual action or task, does that fit into the overall, my overall understanding of what strategically is going to be required for us to be successful? So let's keep that overview up in place, and it's worth thinking about that kind of towards or all throughout the session. Do we get just the first questions come in about the slide deck? So what will happen is you'll get sent a link to the recording of the webinar, so it will be made available to you. So sometimes, we do go at a little bit of pace. There's sometimes a fair amount of information on the slides, so you'll have the opportunity in the future to go back and kind of re-review that at your own pace. Okay, so yeah, you will get that opportunity. Just before we kind of get into it and get going proper, let me see if the technology is with me. Let's see where we are. Let me see if I can do this. Let's see. What do we think, guys? So I've put the poll up there. Is it harder for SMEs to win public sector contracts? That means, versus larger organisations, the giants, as we dramatically called it in the webinar title. So I'm just really curious to get a read. I'm assuming that very, very likely the vast majority of organisations that are on the call, given the title and actually given the composition of how many companies are of which size in the UK, it is likely that the vast majority of you are SMEs. So what do you think? Is it harder? Is it easier? Is it the same, or you just don't feel like you've had enough exposure in this space to give a guess? Really interesting. So really interesting coming in. So almost no one is saying, I don't know if the results share on the screen as we're going through, but basically only 3% are saying no, as in it's easier for SMEs, 65% saying yes, 25% saying don't know, and 9% saying the same. So it's a big, almost 2/3 saying yes, it is harder for SMEs, and a quarter saying we don't know, and only a tiny fraction, 3%, saying no, it's not harder for SMEs. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you all for participating in that one. Let me see if I can get this closed so it then redistributes, reshares the screen. Now, having some technical issues with this before, I think I've got it. I'm hopeful I've got it. I'm hopeful we're back onto the slides. Any problems, guys, just let me know, give me a shout. Okay, and do feel free, like I say, to ask questions through the question function throughout the piece. So really interesting there, straight off the bat, 2/3 of the guys on the line are saying, yeah, definitely it's harder for SMEs. We'll look at the ways we can kind of combat that, the reasons why, and what we can do to try and think about things in a different way and kind of turn the tables a little bit and use our status as SMEs to our advantage. I talked a little bit about maintaining that overview, maintaining that sort of strategic look about things, and that applies to winning submissions. So just as a sort of scene setter, let's look at the slide we've got up here. So there are fundamental things that if we've got in place, if we're in good shape with, we are going to be more successful with tendering, and these apply regardless of whether we're SMEs or whether we're a multinational corporation. The thing that you'll notice as we're going through that I'm going to make reference to, we're going to talk about a little bit, is it sometimes is just a case that SMEs are, they're more, there's not as many, obviously there's not as many people are performing, multiple different types of roles rather than having dedicated people to do a dedicated function. We tend to have less well-established and less rigorous sort of processes, and we tend typically to be a little bit more resource stretched. So within that kind of framework of existence, it can be difficult to do all of the good things that we need to do to be successful with tenders. A lot of tendering, a lot of bidding properly, bidding to a high standard is things relating to, are we spending enough time on the process? Or do we have a rigorous process in place? Or do we have the resources in place? Can we reference our expertise, etc.? Are we spending the right time, the right effort, in the right places to give ourselves the best possible chance? There's no, in my personal opinion, there's nothing, insurmountable that means that a lot of the time, SMEs aren't going to be able to be successful, but we have to be aware of, well, what do other companies at other scales, how are they going to approach this? What kind of rigor and discipline and effort levels are we going to put in? What is difficult to overcome is if there's a really big gap between the effort level being put in by one company, if they're experienced and of a high quality, and the effort level being put in by another company. If there's a really, really big gap, most of the time, the companies that are putting in, the organizations that are putting in a higher level of efforts are going to be the ones that are going to be successful in bidding, as in with most endeavors. All other things being equal, effort in, results out. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind as part of our framework about thinking about this. Okay, so with that in mind, what are the good things we would do if we want to win submissions regardless of our size to be successful and win work? We need to be ready in advance. We need to understand all the things that we need to do. We need to understand what the process we're entering into is and how to go through that in the best possible way. We need to understand as much as we can about the authorities we're looking to sell to, and we need to know as much as we can about the competition who will also be bidding in this space. Okay. So again, these are the sort of foundational pieces around being able to bid really well. There's nothing fundamentally preventing SMEs from having these building blocks in place. It's just going to be that little bit harder in a resource-stretched environment. Okay, but you can't ever escape these being the fundamentals of what makes you more likely to win bids. Okay, so we can't escape it. We shouldn't try. Okay. Moving on then into some of the more specifics that we need to talk about in terms of finding the right opportunities. This, if you think about it as being a process for bidding where we're going to make decisions and take action all the way along a line, all the way along a timeline. Okay, and if there's any point at which we do something wrong, or we miss something, or we don't take the right action, then that can amplify and reverberate down the process. Okay, so it can make it more, so errors that happen kind of early doors can have significant impact towards the end of the process. Okay, so for example, let's put some meat onto those bones. If we, for example, aren't finding the correct opportunities that we're looking for, then we're more likely to pursue opportunities because we want to get involved, we need the work, we want to grow as a business, we want to develop ourselves as an organization. If we're not finding the correct opportunities, what's more likely is we're going to end up then pursuing opportunities that are slightly less suitable for us. If we're pursuing less suitable opportunities, we're less likely to be successful in securing those. We're therefore going to have problems and reevaluate in terms of resource allocation. Maybe we don't spend so much time on this, etc., etc., and we can get into like a really big sequence there. Okay. So what we need to do is kind of get it right at every single stage of the process to give ourselves the best possible outcomes at the end of the process. Hopefully that should be really sort of intuitive. Okay. So part of that process is going to be about finding opportunities, finding the correct opportunities. To find the correct opportunities, we need as much exposure and we need as much visibility of all opportunities so that we can make sure we choose the right ones and have a process in place to do that. You can, and I think most people will know, there are government websites which aggregate the opportunities published across the UK. There's the Contracts Finder service, which is for low value contracts, and there is Find a Tender, which is for quote unquote higher value contracts. These will have a good amount of the available contracts, public sector tenders that are live at any one point. But there are some that are missed from them, and sorting them and filtering them to what might be suitable for your organisation is sometimes a little bit more tricky. You might initially start off using these government portals and not using anything in addition to that. After a time, you might come to the realization that you need a more streamlined approach to make sure you capture whole of market, so you can see all of the opportunities that are going to be relevant for your business. And for that, typically you'll need a paid for subscription service, of which Tenders Direct is the market leading one. But obviously there are other subscription services available. But if you are wanting to get a bit maturity about how you're doing this, how you're searching for opportunities, typically it is a paid for subscription that you are going to need to aggregate all those opportunities in an efficient way and give you ways to sort of manipulate and understand how to use that information. But there are other sources that you can do, and if you're starting out, it might be that you look at some free for services first and then graduate towards a paid for when you want to have that more holistic view of everything that's available for you. When you do have that visibility, then obviously you've got the opportunity to make sure you've got more option to choose the correct contracts to give yourself best opportunity to win them. So that naturally leads us on into what are the correct opportunities in terms of size and type. I was trying to think about how best to sort of articulate this, or how to sort of display it on a slide, and there are some caveats around what I've put up here, but typically you can think of it in these sort of three buckets as a starting point. If you're not doing so already, you'll have some idea around, there will be, for most opportunities, a minimum criteria, minimum levels of, for example, turnover, minimum accreditations, minimum level of expertise or ability to meet specifications. So quite often there will be a criteria, and if you're not there, or I can caveat by saying very close to that. Sometimes there is ways to work around minimum criteria, but typically if you're not close to it or not at the levels that it lays out as being required to bid, then it's very unlikely, if not impossible, that you'll be successful actually in securing work through that submission. It's not enough just to meet the minimum criteria. We have to be able to provide compelling reasons, compelling expertise that we are the right provider to be appointed to deliver this work. So not just that we want it is what I put in there. So do we have significant comparable experience that we can reference? Do we have a sound background or a sound ability to demonstrate that level of expertise? Okay. So we need to not just want it, but we need to provide reasons for the authority to have confidence that within a competitive process, we are the best bet. Okay. And, is it a strategic fit? So we might want it, but does it fit in with the sort of strategic objectives, the way we want to organize ourselves as an organization, the way we want to move forward? And do we have the ability to actually deliver this? Is this going to be a good fit for us in terms of what we're going to be doing and our ability to actually deliver that work and provide that for the authority that's looking to procure? So again, thinking about that, and this is the sort of thing that the SMEs can get wrong. I've seen it lots of times. Again, there's no rocket science here, but pursue opportunities that we meet the criteria against. Pursue opportunities where we've got compelling reasons that we can provide within the response to the authority so that they can have confidence and we can be considered competitive in this space. And go for opportunities that are a suitable fit, that fit into the direction that we want to take as a business. None of it's rocket science, but if we're not doing these things as a minimum standard, we're going to pursue opportunities we're never going to win, or win opportunities we can never deliver, which will then impact our reputation into the future and make things more difficult. So none of these things apply just to SMEs, but it's typically smaller organizations that have more difficulty in applying that kind of rigor to their selection process. Okay, so again, if we pursue the wrong opportunities, we're less likely to win. We're going to get demoralized. We're then going to think about how viable a route to win work is public sector bidding. We're then going to de-resource it. We're going to be less successful, etc. It becomes a route that we just don't pursue. And I've spoken with organizations, dozens and dozens of organizations that have kind of gone down that path and ended up forming that conclusion. Whereas if they were more rigorous about the opportunities that they pursued and about deploying effectively the level of resource required to do that effectively, then they would have had more success and it would have been a potentially a viable route. And actually the path in terms of their engagement in public sector bidding could have been completely divergent if just at a couple of critical points they decided to go a little bit of a different route. So you can see it can be quite significant across the course of a few opportunities. One of the things that's useful to think about is, the type of opportunities that we're going to pursue. I don't want to labor this too much. We've touched on it in other webinars as well. We can look at opportunities which they're just looking for one supplier to perform a body of work over X period of time. That's obviously, if there's only one supplier going to be appointed, that can be quite a challenging thing, dependent on how competitive your space is, how many competitors you think about to pursue that opportunity as well. You can also look at framework opportunities where there's typically going to be a number of suppliers get appointed to them. And again, when we're maybe earlier doors in terms of our experience level, if we're looking at pursuing an opportunity where they're going to appoint 5 or 10 suppliers, that maybe is a more viable route than one where they're just going to look to appoint one. Okay, so have we considered that? Does that factor into our decision about which opportunity to pursue? If it doesn't, then it should, okay, because it changes the maths quite significantly. Okay, if you're one of 10 who could potentially perform a body of work that you'd expect to want to participate, if that's 10 and it's going to be 5 places on a framework, that's maybe looks pretty reasonable. If it's 10 and they're only looking to appoint one supplier to complete the body of work, then that maybe looks a little bit more daunting. And you might know, well, there's 3 or 4 that are really, really, really strong matches against the solution, against the specifications that have been laid out. Okay, so we think we might come fourth or fifth within any kind of contest here. Well, if it's one single supplier, you might go, that's a really tall order, maybe is it worth pursuing? Whereas if it's on to get access on a framework where 5 are being appointed, you might go, that's a much more positive opportunity for us in that kind of instance. So frameworks can be a really viable route. We should always know when we're looking at opportunity, by the way, what type of opportunity it is. And again, this will feed into, are we pursuing the right opportunities? If we don't consider it, we're doing something wrong. So we need to make sure, are we aware it's a framework, etc. Frameworks are, that one-time shot where if you don't get on it, then it'll be closed for the duration. And it's only when it comes back around that we'll be able to then pursue it again. DPS is, on the other hand, a really good way to start, and it is a good opportunity for new organisations to get involved with the public sector. Dynamic purchasing system. There will be some movement in terms of DPS is what they're called and how they operate in the coming years and months. But for now, there are lots of existing DPSs that probably are ones that are going to be relevant for the type of services or goods that you provide. They are open to apply to at any time. They have no maximum number of suppliers that can get appointed to them. So if you meet the minimum criteria, if you meet that criteria, you will get appointed to them, and then you will get access to the opportunities to submit against individual opportunities that are run through that DPS. So DPSs tend to run for a long number of years, and they're open for the full time for people to apply to them within. So if you're an SME, how do I get involved with this? How do I get some work through public sector buyers? If you've not looked at DPS as a particular option, you should at least look to rule out to say, well, there aren't any that are suitable for the type of goods or services that I provide. You need to make that positive step to rule it out. Otherwise, you should be seriously considering whether or not it's a viable route for you and you can apply to them. The application process for DPSs tends to be a bit more straightforward as well. So again, it's really a valuable route to look at. And if you're not sure about it, or if there's ones available for you, do some research and find that out. Again, I talked about there not being any type of, any sort of silver bullets really within this processes for SMEs, although we will come on in a little bit to the specific things around how do I lever some advantages I might have in terms of my status as an SME. We'll talk about that in a slide or two's time. But just setting the scene again, remember I'm talking about what are the things that we need to do well. I talked about how much resource we can put into an opportunity. One company puts in twice as much resource as another company. All other things being equal, the first company is going to win the vast majority of the time, because the amount of work you put in will be reflected in the quality of the submission. As an organisation, we need to be clear on, and again, this is harder for SMEs, so guys, I'm not being all sort of naysayer, doom and gloom. It's doable, but we do have opportunities, but we just have to put in that effort to try and secure work. So we looked at the resourcing requirements. We have a feel for the resourcing requirements that will be required to complete any given bid that we've decided that we think we should pursue. Actually, being able to have a reasonable level of resources to complete the bid should be part of the decision we make about whether or not we can pursue an opportunity, whether we should pursue it. If we know that there is no capacity within the business to do anything within the next 3 weeks, and we've got the perfect opportunity landed with us where we think we are really strong, we've got a really bespoke solution that's going to be perfect, but it's due in 3 weeks and no one within the business has any capacity to complete it, we're not going to win it like that. We would need to either go, how can we generate capacity? How can we rearrange the work that we have to create enough capacity to have a reasonable go at this? Or do we need to have extra capacity brought in to help support this, and or to remove some of the tasks from existing people so that they can then concentrate on this? We can't create winning bids out of thin air. It takes time, it takes effort. It takes a team approach through within your business, okay? So it's really important to understand within the context of responding within a fixed period of time, who are the people going to be responsible for that? How much of their resource is that likely to take up? How much do they have available to support this process within that period? Are those matched up, or is there a big gap? If you've got a bid manager, a bid writer with some, you know, they've got capacity, they've got not a lot of short-term deadlines within the next few weeks, you might be in great shape. If everyone's redlining it already with the work and running BAU stuff, and then you've had a really big bid land on your desk, then how are you realistically going to pull that off? What do you need to do to make sure you've got a good go at that? Again, this is where SMEs tend to, you know, especially sort of smaller ones, small organizations tend to find it more difficult because people are doing this work alongside BAU activities. And that becomes much more of a challenge to find the appropriate level of resource to give themselves the best possible chance. It's a very, very minimum approach. You're going to say, if I've got, you know, quality responses to write within a bid, I want to allow myself, for new content, I'm going to allow myself, you know, a day for each, you know, 1,000 or 1,500 words of content I've got to write, plus extra days for reviews, understanding documents, etc., etc. If I'm sat 2 weeks out and I know the most, you know, it's going to be 10, 20,000 words of content that I've got to write, and I know I've got a couple of days across the business, we can only spare a couple of days, it's very unlikely to be successful. So a big part of success is adequately resourcing the opportunities that you're pursuing and being strategic about, do we have that in place? Do we need to take other steps to get it in place? Someone's asked, what is the DPS? A dynamic purchasing system. Sorry, I should have explained that. It's just the name for these type of a sort of specific type of framework that has those criteria that I mentioned, that's available to apply to all the time, that has no maximum number of suppliers that are allowed onto it, and that anyone would get appointed to it if they do meet the minimum criteria that's been laid out by the authority. So it's an introductory way, it's a good introductory way to get on places where you can then get to look at individual opportunities. The barrier to get on them is lower, and it gets you used to the idea of going through the sort of public sector procurement process. Okay. So sorry, thank you for the question. I should have explained that as I was going through. Keep the questions coming in, guys. Really happy to go through. Okay. The next piece, one of the things that I talked about was around about knowing the buyer being really important. And again, none of it's rocket science. To know the buyer, one of the things we can do is some pre-work and some preparation, and ideally some pre-engagement work. So we're better on what is actually one of the questions that was asked in registration as well. We'll come on to that later on about, you know, if we don't have any visibility, we only know about a tender opportunity when it goes live. How viable an opportunity is that? Well, it can be viable, but at the same time, the more work we can do, the more preparation we can do, the more we know what's going to be required of us in advance of something landing, then the better shape we're going to be in, because we're not under the same amount of time pressure. We've got less work to do in that time pressure, the resourcing piece that I just talked about in the last slide. And we might have some more insights into what's really important to the buyer. Okay. So preparation and pre-engagement is really important. The more we know about the buyer, the more we've done research on them, the more we understand what they're looking for, what might be important to them, the more opportunity we have to tailor our responses and our solution to what it is they're really, really going to be looking for. Okay. How can we do that? Well, number of different ways. Again, what we can do is we can use, if we're doing this without spending any money, we can go on the government website's contracts finder and find a tender. We can use those to look at existing contracts. When were they awarded? When are they looking like they're going to be due for renewal? And we can proactively reach out to organisations to see when they are going to renew them, if they've been extended, etc. And if they'd be willing to have conversations around what they might be looking for in the next iteration of a contract, etc. Ideally, we want to get a bit more sophisticated in that, and again, you're into the realm then of, you know, paid for subscription services. So our subscription tenders direct will provide alerts to say these are upcoming the upcoming expiry dates of contracts which are in the sectors that you've flagged as being suitable for you. So prompting you to have that engagement with the buyer. When a contract, when it goes live, when the procurement process is started formally, then the buyer won't really engage with you. But before that, there's an opportunity that they potentially will engage with you. So if you've got visibility of when those opportunities are coming up, you can then use that as a prompt to try and engage with the buyers and see if they're willing to discuss a little bit about what they might be looking for in a new service delivery. So our platform does that on your behalf, so you can, it does that, it flags the opportunities for you. So again, it's not unique in the market that does that, but it is most comprehensive. But again, it's about saying, are we able to be doing this as rigorously as possible? Okay. In terms of approaching buyers, trying to get that work, you know, I talked about the very early on, there was a slide, and know your buyers was one of the critical points. So this is why we're doing this type of activity. The more we know about who they are, what's important to them generally, and what's important to them specific to any given procurement, then the more chance we have to tailor our offering to what they might be looking for, and therefore the more likely to be successful we are, regardless again of our size. Okay. In terms of if you've identified organisations that might have upcoming contracts, they're going to be launching procurements, but you don't know who to approach. It's just standard stuff, business development stuff. Again, it's a little bit of effort, but again, this will pay off down the line. You might want to reach out to your network and see if anyone within your network has access or has a relationship with people at the authority that you're looking to buy, that you can kind of get an introduction. You can just do a direct approach and call the authority and ask to speak to people, see who would be the most suitable person to speak to. And you can also use LinkedIn to use a little bit of an approach to see who sits within certain seats within the organisation, and to actually make approaches to those as well. Okay, so there are ways to do it, but again, doing that pre-engagement piece is one of the things that larger organisations will be we're more likely to be more developed with. Hopefully I've explained it clearly, that having that engagement, understanding more about the buyer and using opportunities to engage with them before a procurement is launched is clearly an advantage. And it's one of the areas that typically a lot of the smaller organisations I speak with, they're just not doing it as much as larger organisations do. And that's to the detriment, and it's placing them at a disadvantage when it comes to actually putting the submissions together. Because the larger organisation that's done that pre-engagement piece has actually got that informational advantage about what's important to the buyer. Okay, so we need to address that. We need to try and take steps to address that. There's a question, in your opinion, are opportunities in Contract Finder the same as in Find a Contract? Find a Tender, I think you mean, I'm assuming you mean. It's supposed to be that Contract Finder is for the lower value one and Find a Tender is for the higher value ones, although they do sometimes seem to get like kind of muddled in, but the idea is they're supposed to be separated based on whether they're low value or high value. But if you've not got a paid for subscription that you are using to aggregate all of the opportunities, I would suggest probably having a look at both, unless you either low or high value ones you're definitely not interested in. I would probably suggest, if you are just using those government platforms, that you would look across both of them to look for opportunities that may potentially be suitable for you. Okay, keep the questions coming in, guys. We're a little bit behind, but any burning questions, do let me know. Okay, wanted to talk a bit through, and this is the kind of, I guess, meatiest part, just to spend a few minutes on this. And again, I would suggest that re-review this, look at these points when you're away to next think about a submission if you are an SME, and think about, well, what am I doing? Am I sensitive to some of the points here? Are there things that I can talk about within my response? So what are SMEs? We've all, given the polling, we all think we're either not sure or we're pretty sure that it's harder for SMEs to win contracts than larger organisations. So what are the things we want to think about and we can do to try and address that, or to give ourselves to flip the disadvantage into an advantage? And that's a lot of the things that are here. Geography is a big one. Now, this does assume, when we're talking about geography, it typically assumes that the SME is located locally to the authority that they're looking to bid into, versus a national corporation who's going to be all over the country, etc. I know it's not necessarily the case. SMEs will potentially bid for things in lots of different places around the country, in which case this one doesn't apply. But if you are bidding for local things, then you need to be leveraging that. Okay, you need to talk about local presence. You need to talk about and indicate your commitment to the community, to the local community. Talk about the fact that the carbon footprints are going to be reduced by using local suppliers, etc. You need to talk about things like about being sensitive to, you know, the issues or the demographics of an area, like the area that the authority, what are the challenges that they've got? Is it an area with higher levels of deprivation? Is it an area with more with an aging population? Are there issues with accessibility because it's more rural, etc., etc.? So if you're local, you should have more sensitivity to these type of issues, and you should be reflecting those in your submission. You should have more understanding of what's the authority wanting to achieve, what are their strategic goals, and how can I align my offerings to what they're looking to achieve. Be more sensitive to social things, social impacts, more social aware, what's going on locally that we can tie in with, etc. We should have a wider range of, a wider network, a range of contacts. So there are organisations that we can talk about bringing in or working with in contract, or that we can talk about referring people to, or that we can talk about providing some social value to, etc., etc. It should be, when we're talking about local things, it should be a lot more plausible and a lot more compelling than when a national organisation, a national company we're competing against does. Okay. Not that it necessarily drives anything particularly, but you know, there is this government target that at least a third of work is going to be delivered by SMEs. So in theory, it should be at the forefront. I think it is becoming more so. It should be up front in the minds of procurers that they should be looking to award to SMEs. So don't feel like you've got to hide being an SME within the process. Not that you can anyway, but be proud about the origin of the organisation. You can talk about that in good terms and make clear that you're a successful, thriving SME. Okay. In terms of some of the language that we use, and this is a little bit into the sort of the bid writing craft, we can make it feel like it's more important to us than it would be to an organisation, a large organisation. We can make it feel like we're going to provide a more tailored service, more personal, that it's more important to us than it would be to a large one. So we can tailor, these are a couple of different points on the slide, we can tailor the offering to that regard, okay? So we almost want to be making reference to the fact that we can do this type of tailoring. We can be flexible in the approach that we take and how we deliver that, because we're small, we're agile, we're not burdened with these overwhelming systems and processes that very large organizations are going to have in place. Talked there on one of the points about kind of ghosting the larger competition. So we're almost inferring by saying how flexible and adaptable and able to react as a smaller organization we are. The inference then is that larger organizations are going to struggle more with that regard. Maybe that type of flexibility is listed as being one of the things that the authority is going to place quite a lot of value in. Maybe it's the sort of thing where, you know, demand isn't going to be steady throughout the contract, and they want a supplier who's going to have that high level of flexibility and adaptability. Maybe you can present yourself and use that as a source of advantage versus a larger organization who's got, you know, rigorous systems, processes fitting into, you know, a big machine. It's going to be less straightforward for them to show that sort of flexibility. Maybe there's been occasions in the past where you've been super flexible in your approach to meet local needs. So these are the type of things we need to be building into our responses. Other points just to reference, then I touched quite a lot on the solution design piece about flexibility there. The other thing around about the sort of solution design in our offering is if we know that there are going to be opportunities that we want to pursue, that we know there's going to be larger organizations, large, very well established ones who are likely to hoover up a lot of these contracts, they're going to have a kind of more of a sort of standard approach and methodology for responding and for their service offering, okay? If we know that we're up against it in that regards, then it should incentivize us to take more risks in terms of what we're offering. We should be able to think about, well, can we do something, you know, a little bit different, a bit distinct from a standard approach? Can we think about changing the way in which we're going to be delivering the service so that it stands out. Maybe it's something that other competitors just wouldn't think to do. Can we change the model? Can we change the pricing approach? Or can we have a totally different structure than we normally would? Phil, the more we know we're up against it with large organizations that are just going to have highly competent, ABC type bids, the more we should be willing to say, okay, well, like, we need to appeal to the sense of there's something different, there's something innovative that we can do. And sometimes it won't work, but maybe it changes the odds on us winning from being, I don't know, just making up 1 in 10 to 1 in 2 or 1 in 3, because there might be a number of those people in terms of some of those organizations, and they are looking for something different. Okay, so the more we're just going to be, if we don't want to put in a really, really good bid where we can do everything really well, but just not quite as well as large organizations, let's use the opportunity to think about, do we actually want to be innovative and shift what's being offered? Do we want to think about the solution in designing something quite unique or quite innovative? So is it worth just putting in the same old thing, or do we do something quite different? And if we feel like maybe we're up against it, it gives us more incentive to take risks in terms of our approach, because if we just put in the same approach, maybe we just lose them anyway. There might be opportunities for lower costs across contracts, because larger organizations, they have typically like bigger back office functions. There's a large number of people that have to be paid through the delivery of contracts. Therefore, some of their costs might be fixed, costs might be higher. Therefore, maybe we can have an opportunity to perform contracts at a lower cost, etc. I've touched on similar concepts already, but the last point there is about smaller chains of command. So, maybe that access to, really high level people within an organization that the authority might get access to, or that are going to be empowered to resolve any issues, to make decisions with them. Maybe that's going to be really, really appealing. Again, fitting in with the idea about being flexible, adaptable, being able to be reactive to situations. Maybe highlight the fact that you've got quite a flat structure, that they're going to get access to people who are empowered to make decisions, rather than being, going to have to go through levels and levels and levels before they can get to speak to someone who's actually going to be able to make a decision and help them with their issue. One of the questions that's come in, it's a good one, PPN 1120. So authority, not that I've seen it that much, but one of the things that authorities can do is for particular procurement, they can actually restrict to either local or to SMEs. They can actually say, we want SMEs to, you be an SME to be eligible to perform this contract. In reality, I haven't seen this being used particularly widely, but it does exist, and authorities have the opportunity to consider it where it might be a suitable project based on what they're procuring to do. So they can actually restrict access to a contract just to SMEs. Okay, so it will say on the contract notice, it will actually specify if that's the case. Okay, so you will see that, and if you are an SME and that's in place, then obviously that should have a bit of a bearing on, actually, maybe this is a more suitable opportunity for us to pursue, because maybe some of the big ones that we would typically be competing against won't have access to this. Okay, so do look out for that, although in reality I haven't seen it being applied that much as yet. Conscious of time, just a little bit of chat around, overcoming barriers. So some important things to bear in mind. One of the things that we struggle with as SMEs is the backlog of the history of work that we can reference. Do draw parallels to your work, and do the linkage for the authorities. So draw the parallels to make it as clear as that the previous work you've done is as relevant as possible to the opportunities that you're going to pursue. I've talked about this kind of overview piece, so think about that strategically. Where are the gaps that you have, and how can you go about plugging them? Okay, if you have gaps in the short term that you don't have in place that you can meet criteria, then you can rely on subcontractors. You can go, okay, we can do 80% of this, 20% we can't do. We need to think about having a subcontractor in place who we will who's committed to working with us across this project if we're successful, and we reference against those as part of our submission. So we don't have to meet it 100%. Sometimes we know that there will be particular subcontractors that we'll need to rely on, but do we have that existing network of the type of subcontractors that are likely to, we would need to rely on for the type of projects that we want to pursue? It's very difficult to organise that within the context of a live bid. Can we do that work in advance? Otherwise, when we need to be clear on, relating to that, where are the gaps within our organisation in terms of experience, in terms of skills, and do we need to be outsourcing that? Do we need to be thinking about other people that we can bring in, other organisations that we need to engage with to be able to put together a kind of a compliant and likely successful bid? One of the things to think about is partnering larger organisations. So where and how do we want to get into the supply chain for larger organisations? So if the larger organisations are winning government contracts, do we want to become one of their subcontractors? Again, it's a research piece around which contracts would that likely apply for, which organisations are winning these contracts, and do we have any network or any way to approach these ones to understand if we can offer our services as part of that supply chain. Again, the information about what contracts are out there, who's winning them, is publicly available. It's then a question of some good old business development work. What can you bring to the organisation that's secured the main contract? How can you be that subcontractor? What do you do differently that's going to make them want to work with you, etc. It could be that there's some larger companies that don't fulfil certain contracts, so that only specialise in a small part of it. So it's not always the case that large company wins main contract, small company is subcontractor. It can be the other way around as well. So are there potentially larger companies that you can engage with who can do part of the scope or part of the requirements that you don't meet? And again, do some more research on it, guys, but you can think about forming a consortium for a specific opportunity where two or more existing entities are working together on a project. It's not the creation or the formation of a new legal entity, and you have defined aspects of the scope that you will provide and defined aspects of the scope that the other partner in the consortium, partners in this consortium, will provide. So it's a way of expanding the number of opportunities that are available to you where you aren't able to meet the full specifications. Okay, so again, is it worth considering? Are there lots of contracts that you're seeing where you can do a portion or half of them, but you can't do all of them? In those type of scenarios, are there others that are going to be in a similar boat where you've got complementary skills and you can work together by forming a consortium to be able to meet that? Again, it's a little bit more complexity to it. I would encourage you to go and do a bit of independent research on that piece, but it might open up to more opportunities that might be suitable for you. That was a bit whistle stop. I know it was, guys. Someone said, are there levels of financial levels of contracts where the buyer doesn't need to put out a lengthy open tender? I mean, yeah, so it's typically there's typically a level where they will go to, it becomes like a low value tender. I think the thresholds have maybe just changed. For local government bodies, it was £25,000, and for central government ones, it was £10,000. I think the levels have just gone up. The numbers escape me just now, but they are relatively low, and anything kind of beyond that will go through a form of formal procurement process. So it's not very high before it gets into the realm of this will go through a formal procurement process rather than them just approaching one or two suppliers to get quotes. Okay. I'm conscious of having run a little bit over time. I know there were some questions that were asked in registration. I've covered off quite a lot of those throughout the course, but there were some ones I haven't. Just a couple of things to finish up there on, guys, before the end of the session. There's the details there of the email address and also telephone number. If you do want to carry on the conversation, if you feel like there's points that we haven't gone over that you'd like to discuss and learn a little bit more about, do drop us a note and we're quite happy to discuss them. What we can do is, for anyone that's been on the call, we can offer basically a consultancy support call where we go into a bit more detail about a particular issue or your approach, and understand what we can do, or what potentially we could offer some recommendations to improve how you're doing it. So if you do want to book in a free support call with myself or one of the team, just drop us a note on that email or give us a call, and we'll be very happy to organise that, and we'll go through that with you and see if we can provide some value. Very last thing was just to let you know that there are some free resources for you available to help a little bit. There's a back catalogue of webinars which go into different topics in a bit more detail. There's our training courses that you can go and book onto, and there's some things to help you as well, which are different types of resources, infographics, etc., articles. So there's lots out there that you can get for free, and then also training courses that you can book onto that are really highly regarded as well. If you don't have a subscription service to aggregate all of the potential opportunities for your business, highly recommend R1, obviously, but go on Tenders Direct. You can get a free 7-day full access trial. With that access trial, you're getting all of the live opportunities. You can see all of the historic opportunities that have come through, and you can get a real feel for, have I had the visibility that I need to make sure that I'm choosing the right opportunities to therefore increase my opportunities to be successful into the future. The trial is no obligation. You're not providing any bank details or anything like that. It's just a 7-day trial, and then you make a decision if you wanted to carry it on or not. So that was Whistle Stop. We went through a lot of ground. Really thank you for participating in the poll. Thank you very much for the questions that came in. Details are up there. You want to carry on the conversation, just let me know. Very happy to arrange a call and to schedule a follow-up, and really to get a bit more information about how we might be able to help. We'll do some feedback. We'll send out some feedback and get in touch with everyone that's attended as well, just so you can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, and if there's anything else you wanted to discuss, we'd be more than happy to do so. Really thank you very much for giving up the time on this Tuesday morning. I hope you've been able to take something from the webinar. I hope you've got some food for thought, and it will drive some actions that will help you be as successful as possible in beating the giants in your bidding into the future. But for now, thanks very much for listening and for participating, and we'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.